And it turns out it was registered to my dad's shop in our hometown. So being a car serial number nut, especially Ferraris, there were always a few cars that I wanted to find out where they were. And one of those cars was the Ferrari that really got me into researching Ferraris. And it's sort of a personal story. I grew up in a town of about 30,000 people or so, but there were no exotics. Working class mostly people. If you saw a new Lexus or a new Acura, that person was ballin' in that town. But there was this one Ferrari that happened to be owned by my dad's boss at the time in our hometown. So that was effectively the only Ferrari around. And lo and behold, it was within arm's reach of me, so to speak, at a very young age, even though I don't really remember the car. But my dad would always tell me a few stories about it, being around that 308, because my dad actually did some of the work on it. It was a repair shop and they would service about anything. And yes, they would service the owner's fairly new at the time 308. So the story goes with this car, as I was told by my dad, the owner wanted a 308 really bad, but at the time, the early 80s, the US ones were all fuel injected and they sucked. So this guy wanted a carb 308, and he found the cheapest way to do it was to import one, and even cheaper than that was to import a right-hand drive one from the UK. So sure enough, he got a right-hand drive 308 GTB, a very early carb one, a steel body though, had it imported to the US, did all the gray market stuff to it to make it legal and everything. And promptly repainted the car, as my dad had told me from his recollection. The car, he said, was originally some blue color. He wasn't sure. He thought it was a darker blue. And he said he repainted it black because he wanted a black 308. And my dad couldn't even remember if it was a Targa or a hard top or anything like that. But he knew it was a 308. He knew it was carb. So that helped me sort of narrow down the possible cars it could be, especially being a right-hand drive car. But this guy had a 308 for a number of years, and in the early 90s or so, sold the business, the repair shop, to my dad, and he moved away to another state and everything, and my dad never really heard from him again. This guy set up a new shop and all that, and a couple times my dad tried to get in touch with him, but it never really worked out. This guy was doing his whole new thing, completely isolated from everyone he left in Ohio. But we did hear from one of my dad's friends who was able to visit this guy about 10 years or so after he moved away, visited him and said that he still had this 308 and it was sitting in his garage with tons of dust on it and boxes on it and looked like it hadn't run in years. So that sort of answered a question that me and my dad always had of, what happened to this car? So we sort of had an update to it of, okay, it's around somewhere. It still exists. Years went by and I got a random text from my dad one night. He said, "Do you know of this site Ferrari Chat?" And I texted back, "I absolutely know the site of Ferrari Chat. I know that site extremely well." And he said, "I think I found Greg's car." My dad apparently was in the habit of every few months, he would Google this guy's name and random keywords just to see if something came up, because my dad was almost as curious as I was about this car. And lo and behold, something popped up on Ferrari Chat. This guy posted saying he had just purchased this 308 and he had no records on it other than the paperwork he got from the dealer he bought it from, which was here in the US, and that there was one line from a former registration from the mid-80s that was this name and city. And he posted this on Ferrari Chat, and it turns out that it was registered to my dad's shop, and in our hometown. So this guy posted saying, does anyone know anything about this car? So I immediately sent this guy a message and said, hey, I know why you don't have service records for this car, and I know the story behind this car. So I emailed him and we went back and forth a number of times, and yeah, it turns out he had no service records of the car other than it was imported to the US in I think 1984, and nothing from then until he bought it, which I want to say was 2016 or so. He bought it from a dealer in northeastern US. He had nothing in between. The only thing was just that one initial registration of the car with the name of the shop and the city. So we went back and forth, and I filled him in on what I knew about the car, and even asked my dad what he could remember about any of the services done, any history of the car, all of that. And this guy was, I think, pleasantly surprised that he actually found someone who knew someone who worked on the car, which was my dad. My dad did at least one of the belt changes on the car and a few other random maintenance items on it. So it turns out this guy bought it here in the US, and he brought it back over to the UK. He found the car, a right-hand drive 308 in the US, and was like, sure, I'll take it. It's probably cheap because it's in the US. So he brought it back to his home, and he had a number of other Ferrari 308s as well. So this would be added to his fleet. And he did a little digging on the car, I think through the factory, to figure out what color it was. And sure enough, the car was originally blue. It was a pretty medium blue, and he had the car completely repainted and got everything pretty much up to not museum quality, but quite close. The car was a very, very nice car after he had finished going through it. And he even sent me a number of photos of the car, so I could see what this car would have originally looked like when it came to the US.
Last year, Sonny and I tried out Avalon King's Armor Shield 9 ceramic coating on my Porsche 993, and it came out great, and since then it's been much easier to keep clean. You can see the story about that here, but more importantly, this month we're going to try it out on my LP640. The car's finally done being repainted, and right now AP3 is putting a clear bra on the whole car, and on top of that, we're going to put the ceramic coating to make it look better and easier to clean. So if you'd like to try that out on your car, you can click the link in the description below.